students and scholars, teachers and trainers, professors and professionals, those who are listening, watching on the field of language, literature and grammar, our scholars, especially those who are preparing themselves for appearing in NET and SLET examination of English literature. As earlier we have studied Shakespearean writings and Dickens writings, what similarities they have on the basis of their philosophies and psychologies. We find that both they have written tragedies. And Shakespeare has written tragedies like Macbeth, Hamlet, The Merchant of Venice, King Lear, Othello. Some of the comedies that Shakespeare has written. But both they have their same objectives for the reformation, information, instruction, direction, and so more we can say. Both the aspect of life he has written for providing pleasure to the readers. It was in the beginning of the Renaissance period that we studied English literature from 14th, 15th and 16th century period. Especially William Shakespeare, Edmund Spenser, Francis Bacon, literary giants, those who belonged to the Elizabethan age. As we read in the English language, the novelists, dramatists and poets, those who belong to the Renaissance period, they were the starters, beginners and initiators. Historically, we read 1469 when Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj born, 1498, Vasco da Gama who discovered India, in 1600, East India Company came in India, 1564, this was the time of birth year of William Shakespeare. Students and scholars, you know that who is known as the founder of dramas? William Shakespeare. A person who is known as the founder of dramas, William Shakespeare. When we go through the Oliver Twist, that is written by Charles Dickens, as Shakespeare had selected his characters, those who belonged to the higher class of society, they were aristocratic, royal, and belonged to rich family. But ultimately they declined because of their character. To these circumstances, Shakespeare wanted to convey the message that anyone who belongs to the royal class, he may come down, he may decline because of the declining of their character. To the didactic purpose, Shakespeare has presented a lot of things. Similarly, Dickens, who has written Oliver Twist. It can be compared with the Munnu, which was written by Jayant Mahapatra, Indian writing in English. Mulk Raj Anand also presented Kuli in the same stream of thoughts, because 19th century period, this period was the period of exploitation, slavery, injustice, disturbances in the society. So that's why they presented such kind of novels and dramas. In 19th century period, or in the end of the 19th century period, T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot and William Wordsworth, both they were opposite to each other in presenting their thoughts and ideas. As William Wordsworth says at one place, recollected in tranquility of our heart and mind. Dear friends, as we study Indian writings in English, we read that Swami Vivekananda, who born in 1863, who was the well-wisher, he did know about Walt Whitman from or since his childhood. Literary writings was gone through by Swami Vivekananda in his childhood. An important work that Walt Whitman presented through his lifetime, it was Leaves of Grass, where he has written Song of Myself in the reference of the demise of Abraham Lincoln, who was the president of the USA, the America. In 1893, it was the time when Swami Vivekananda went to the USA, and before it, in 1892, when Walt Whitman passed away, but Swami Vivekananda re-expressed his thoughts and philosophies again. In the end of the 19th and 20th century period, we study Thomas Hardy. In parallel of it, T.S. Eliot, who presented his writings by saying that poetry is not the turning loose from emotions, but it is an escape from emotions. Theory of impersonality, theory of traditional and conventional talents he presented through his writings, like John Keats, who says, art is long, life is short. Intellectually, brilliantly he presented his writings. Thomas Hardy, we read in the form of the depictor, portrayal of the exploitations at that time. But on the other hand, he expressed Tess D. Arbor-Willis, George Eliot, who was drastically being exploited. It is the medical description of an oak, an incident. In this chapter, we are introducing to Gabriel Oak. Who is the hero of this novel? Gabriel Ock. And who is the heroine of this novel? She is Bathsheba, who got married ultimately with Gabriel Ock. In between this episode, you observe a lot of disturbances, many ups and downs. Gabriel Ock is the hero of this novel. He is a young man of 28. How many years old he was? How many years old he is? 28. He is a typical countryman, villager. He belongs to a village. This is clearly shown by his manners and his dress that he wears. Because of his modest style, wearing clothes. One day, while he is working in his field, he sees Bathsheba Aberdeen. As soon as he sees her, he falls in love with her. He considers her a vain girl. Vain girl? Simple. He is, however, very much charmed by her beauty. Because of his because of her external attraction, he came in contact of Bathsheba. Gabriel Ock was a young bachelor of 28. Who is a bachelor? A person who is unmarried. He is a bachelor. He is a bachelor of a young man, a young bachelor of 28. He was a man of sound judgment and good moral character. He was good in judgment and moral character. He was popularly called Farmer Ock. He was a little old-fashioned and dressed in awkward dress. He had a big old pocket watch. These were the features of his personality. How did he look to us? It did not work well and needed correction several times in a day. Ox saw a young lady sitting on the top of a wagon near Narcombe Hill. It was loaded with luggage. The young lady was sitting there all alone. She looked extremely beautiful. The cart driver had gone away to bring back the tailboard of the wagon. Lost on the way, the lady took out a mirror and looked into it. She was imagining, she was inspiring and motivating her, praising her beauty to the mirror. Farmer Oak watched all this from behind a hedge. He was greatly amused. Gabriel Oak saw that and he was attracted towards her at first sight. The girl seemed to him some proud also. The cart driver returned and the wagon moved. It stopped at the toll gate. There was some discussion at the gate between the lady and the gatekeeper. The young lady had paid 2 pence short and the gatekeeper would not let the wagon pass unless the full payment was made. By this time, Farmer Og, who had been following the wagon at some distance, also reached there. He paid the balance over which there was so much discussion. The gatekeeper, the toll gate keeping to the gatekeeper, Oak said that the young woman, though handsome, had her faults, and the greatest of them is vanity. What does Oak say about women? Vanity of the woman. Vanity means outwardness of the woman. Chapter 2, Night, the Flock, and Interior, another interior. In this chapter, we are told many things about Gabriel Oak. Gabriel was a shepherd. Now he is a farmer. Earlier he was a shepherd. Now he is a farmer. He has bought 200 sheep. He lives in a hut. He is quite happy with his sheep. On the night of 20th December, very strong wind blew. Very strong wind blew. Gabriel was in his hut playing on his flute. At about 1 o'clock, he came out of his hut. He walked a little and reached the cowshed. He saw light coming out of it. He peeped into it and saw two women talking together. One of them was the girl he had seen in the wagon. She was telling that she would go to the market in the morning. It was the night of 20th of December. St. Thaomas Day was to be celebrated the next day. About half of night had passed. It was severe cold. Very strong winds were blowing. It blew through the trees on the northern hill. In doing so, it produced different kinds of sounds. The night was clear but dark. Stars shone brightly in the sky. Gabriel was in his hut. The beauty of the lovely night filled his heart with joy. So he began to play upon his flute. Its sweet music spread to a long distance. Some time back, Gabriel was a poor man. He worked as a shepherd. He was a very hardworking man. Soon he got its reward. He became the owner of a farm. He bought 200 sheep now. People now called him Farmer Oak. But he knew his real position very well. He had not yet paid the full price of the sheep. He took a lantern. He went to his sheep. He moved about in their midst for some time. He saw a newborn lamb. He brought it into his hut. He put it to give it some warmth. Gabriel's hut was small. In shape, it was like Noah's Ark. It stood on a high place. It was quite comfortable. Tools, articles of food were there. After bringing the lamb into the hut, Gabriel went to bed. The heat of the stove made the lamb active. It began to bleat. It made Gabriel wake up. He took the lamp in his arms. Then he went out in the darkness. He put the lamp near its mother. Gabriel remained standing in the darkness. Note the time. It was 1 o'clock. He again looked up. He saw a beautiful scene of nature and considered it a supreme work of art. The loneliness of the night pleased him. There was no one with whom he could share his joy. He then moved forward. He saw a cow shed near the trees. A dim light was coming out of it. From the roof there was a small opening. Standing on a high place, Gabriel peeped into it. He saw two women. One of them was a young lady, the other was past middle age. Gabriel could not see the face of the young lady. She wore a big cloak. The two ladies were talking. They were talking about their sick cow called Daisy. She was ill, so they had to come to the shed to look after her. The young lady wished they were rich enough to engage a man do these things. The other said that as they were not so rich, they had to do them themselves. The young lady told her about the loss of her hat. The elder lady said that she had no oatmeal and bran for the cows. On hearing this, the younger woman said that she would go to the market in the morning and bring all the necessary things. Gabriel heard the conversation of the two ladies and became eager to know who the young lady was. When she removed her cloak, he at once recognized her. She, she was the same girl whom he had seen in the wagon. After some time, the two ladies went away. Gabriel returned to his own hut. Next, chapter 3. A girl on horseback. The leaves. When the girl returns, he gives her the hat. The girl takes the hat without thanking him. One night it is very cold. Gabriel's hut is quite. One night it is very cold. Gabriel's hut is quite warm as there is fire burning. Gabriel gets into his bag and falls asleep. He forgets to open the ventilator. Consequently, the room is full of smoke. Gabriel's dog realizes the danger and so begins to bark and scratch at the door. Just then the girl comes to milk the cow. She goes to Gabriel. Next morning, Og saw the young lady on horseback going to the market. He thought that she would come back to search her lost hat. He himself tried to find the hat and soon succeeded. The hat was lying in a corner in the grass. He returned with it to his hut. He kept an eye on activities of that young lady. When Gabriel was about to return her hat head, he saw something very unusual. She thought that nobody observed her. After some time, she went back. Soon she came back to milk her cow. Oak went forward to return her hat. He had a brief conversation with her. He foolishly told her that he saw her doing some exercise on horseback. This was an act of bad manners. It was wrong to observe a lady in his manner. She felt offended and abruptly left him. Later, Oak realized that he should not have done so. Oak's interest in the lady continued. He always watched her activities with interest. But Bathsheba scrupulously avoided him. She did not even look at him. This made him sad. Bathsheba came to the cowshed every morning and evening to milk her cow. One cold evening, Walk sat waiting for the beautiful lady. As it was very cold, he closed the door and lay down on his bed to take rest. He soon fell asleep. When he awoke, he found himself in circumstances. He saw the girl beside him. His head was upon her lap, his face and neck were wet, and her fingers were unbuttoning his collar. He gradually realized what had happened. He knew he owed his life to that young lady who arrived in time to save him from death due to suffocation. Over gratitude, he did not know how to express the feelings of his heart. The girl gave him her hand. He held it very lightly and left it to soothe, and without kissing, she gave him her hand again. Then, this time he had it longer but hesitated to kiss it. He told her his name and wanted to know the girl's name. The girl, however, left the hut without letting him know her name. Gabriel felt himself guilty of want of tact. Next, read chapter 4, Gabriel's resolve, the visit, the mistake. Gabriel had fallen in love with Bathsheba. He continued to watch through the hedge for her regular coming, and thus his sentiments towards her were deepened. By making enquiries, he found that the girl's name was Bathsheba Everdeen. He also learned that the cow would go dry in about 7 days. He dressed the eighth day. At last, the eighth day came. The cow had ceased to give milk for the year. Bathsheba Everdeen came up the hill no more. Bathsheba had come to Norcombe Hill to visit Mrs. Hurst, who was her aunt. Oak decided to visit Bathsheba at her aunt's house. He decided to give a lamb as a gift to Bathsheba. He tried to look his best on this occasion. He went to Bathsheba's aunt's house. When Oak reached there, Bathsheba was not present. Oak told Mrs. Hurst that he liked Bathsheba very much and wanted to marry her. He asked her if Bathsheba had any suitors. Mrs. Hurst told him that Bathsheba had many suitors. This made Oak disappointed. He saw no chance in such a fierce competition for Bathsheba's hand. Oak thought it was no use waiting for her, so he left the place. Running towards him. She had returned soon after Oak's departure from her aunt's house. On learning about his conversation with her aunt, she hastened to contradict her aunt's information. She said to him, "It was quite a mistake, aunt, telling you I had a young man already. I haven't a sweetheart at all, and I never had. I thought that at times go with women It was such a pity to send you away thinking that I had several. This information naturally encouraged awe. It revived his hope of winning Bathsheba's. He declared his love for Bathsheba, but Bathsheba promptly rejected his love suit. His repeated appeals had no effect on her. There were two strong reasons for her refusal. She said that she had no love for Oak. She said that a young and independent lady like her could not be tempted by a weak and humble Oak. She advised him to marry a wealthy lady. Oak was simple and straightforward. He was convinced of Bathsheba's logic. Oak was greatly disappointed and angry. Departure of Bathsheba, a pastoral tragedy. One day, Og learnt of Bathsheba's departure. She left her aunt's house and went to Weatherbury, a place 20 miles away from Norcombe Hill. Og was very sad for he still loved her. He remembered her very much. Gabriel Og had two dogs. The older dog was called George, and the younger one had no time. George was very intelligent, but it was now very old to be of much help to walk. The younger one was over enthusiastic. The misplaced sense of responsibility of this dog caused Hawk's ruin as a farmer. It so happened that in his zeal to look after the sheep, this young dog chased them in the night and brought them to the brink of a chalk pit tram where 200 out of 250 of sheep fell into the pit. There was a confused tinkling of sheep bells. Oak rushed out to find out the causes. He saw all the sheep were dead. He was full of grief and anger. When he becomes aware of the enormity of his loss, Oak had gradually improved his financial status from the humble situation of a shepherd to that of a farmer. He had become a bailiff first and then a farmer on the strength of his industry and integrity. All his labor of so many years was destroyed suddenly by the mischief of this dog. He thanked God that he was yet a bachelor. He shot the dog dead in order to clear the account. He sold the rest of the sheep and all his property. He was almost penniless now. In chapter 6, we read the fear, the journey, the fire. Rest of the questions have you written?
Yes.
Okay.
First year वाला को भी
Oliver Twist, written by Charles Dickens, as we have read. William Shakespeare, who has presented his writings as you like it. It cannot be expected that this system of farming would produce any very extraordinary or crop. Oliver Twist's ninth birthday found him a pale, thin child, somewhat diminutive in stature and decidedly small in circumference, but nature or inheritance had implanted a good sturdy spirit in Oliver's spent, thanks to the spare diet of the establishment, and perhaps to this circumstance may be attributed his having any ninth birthday at all. Be this as it may, however, it was his ninth birthday, and he was keeping it in the coal cellar with a select party of two other young gentlemen who, after participating with him in a sound thrashing, had been locked up for atrociously presuming to be hungry when Mrs. Mann, the good lady of the house, was unexpectedly startled by the apparition of Mrs. Bumble, the beadle striving to undo the wicket of the garden gate. Goodness gracious, is that you, Mr. Bumble, sir? Said Mrs. Mann, thrusting her head out of the window in well affected ecstasies of joy. My heart alive, Mr. Bumble, how glad I am to see you, surely. Now, Mr. Bumble was a fat man and a choleric, so instead of responding to this open hearted salutation in a kindred spirit, he gave the little wicket a tremendous shake and then bestowed upon it a kick which could have emanated from no leg but a beadle's. Lord, only think, said Mrs. Mann, running out, for the three boys had been removed by this time. Only think of that. That I should have forgotten that the gate was bolted on the inside. On account of them, dear children, walk in, sir, walk in. Pray, Mrs. Bumble, do, sir. Although this invitation was accompanied with a courtesy that might have softened the heart of it, by no means mollified the beadle. Do you think this respectful or proper conduct? Mrs. Swan inquired. Mr. Bumble, grasping his cane to keep the parish officers evading at your garden gate when they come here upon parochial business connected with the parochial offense. Are you aware, Mrs. Mann, that you are, as I may say, a parochial delegate and a stipendiary? I am sure, Mr. Bumble, that I was only telling one or two of the dear children, as it's so fond of you, that it was you a coming, replied Mrs. Mann with great humility. Mr. Bumble had a great idea of his oratorical powers and his importance. He had displayed the one and vindicated the other. He relaxed. Well, well, Mr. Mann, he replied, it may be, as you say, it may be. Lead the way in, Mrs. Mann, for I come on business and have something to say. Mrs. Mann ushered the bridal into a small parlor with a brick floor, placed a seat for him, and officiously positioned his cocked hat and cane on the table before him. Mr. Bumble wiped from his forehead the perspiration which his walk had engendered, glanced complacently at the head, and smiled. Yes, he smiled, beadles are but men, and Mrs. Bumble smiled. Now don't you be offended at what I am going to say, observed Mrs. Mann with captivating sweetness. You had your own walk, you know, or I wouldn't mention it. Now will you take a little drop of something, Mr. Bumble? Not a drop, said Mr. Bumble, waving his right hand in a dignified but placid manner. I think you will, said Mrs. Mann, who had noticed the tone of the refusal and the gesture that had accompanied it, just a little drop with a little cold water and a lump of sugar, and Mr. Bumble coughed. Now just a little drop, said Mrs. Mann persuasively. Now, why it is what I am obliged to keep a little of it in the house to put into the blessed infant's daffy when the aunt. Well, Mr. Bumble, replied Mrs. Mann as she opened a cotton cupboard and took down a bottle and glass. It's gin, I will not deceive you. Mr. B, it is gin. Do you give the children daffy? Mrs. Mann inquired Bumble, following with his eyes the interesting process of mixing. Ah, bless him, that I do, dear, as it is, replied the nurse. I couldn't see him suffer before my very eyes, you know, sir. No, said Mr. Bumble approvingly. No, you could not. You are a human woman. Mrs. Mann, here she set down the glass. I shall take a early opportunity of mentioning it to the board. Mrs. Mann, he drew it towards him. You feel as a mother. Mrs. Mann, he stirred the gin and bitter. I drink your health with cheerfulness, Mrs. Mann, and he swallowed half of it. And now about business, said the widow, taking out a leathern pocket book. The child that was half baptized. Oliver Twist is 9-year-old today. Bless him, interposed Mrs. Mann, inflaming her left eye with the corner of her apron, and notwithstanding a offered reward of £10, which was afterwards increased to £20, notwithstanding the most superlative and I may say supernatural exertion on the part of this parish mumble. We have never been able to discover who is his father or what was his mother's settlement, name, or condition. Mrs. Mann raised her hands in astonishment but added after a moment's reflection, how comes he to have any name at all? The widow drew himself up with great pride and said, I invented it. You, Mr. Humble, I, Mrs. Mann, we name our foundings in alphabetical order. The last one as Swabble. I named him, this was a T twist. Next one as comes will be unwin, and the next Wickens I have got names ready made to the end of the alphabet and all the way through it again when we come to Z. Why you are quite a literary character, sir, said Mrs. Mann. Well, well, said the beadle, evidently gratified with the compliment. Perhaps I may be, Mrs. Mann. He finished the gin and water and added, Oliver being now too old to remain here. The board have determined to have him back into the house. I have come out myself to take him there, so let me see him at once. I I'll fetch him directly, said Mrs. Mark, leaving the room for that purpose. Oliver, having had by this time as much of the outer coat and hands removed as could be scrubbed off in one washing, was led into the room by his benevolent protectress. Make a bow to the gentleman, Oliver, said Mrs. Mann. Oliver made a bow which was divided between the beadle on the chair and the cooked hat on the table. Will you go along with me, Oliver? Said Mr. Bumble in a majestic voice. Oliver was about to say that he would go along with anybody with great readiness, yet glancing upward, he caught sight of Mrs. Mann, who had got behind the beadle's chair and was shaking her fist at him with a furious contempt. He took the hint at once for the fist had been too often impressed upon his body not to be deeply impressed upon his recollection. Will she go with me? Inquired poor Oliver. No, she can't, replied Mr. Bumble. What, she will come and see you sometimes. This was no very great consolation to the child. Young as he was, however, he had sense enough to make a feint of feeling great regret at going away. It was no very difficult matter for the boy to call tears into his eyes. Hunger and recent ill usage are great assistants if you want to cry. And Oliver cried very naturally indeed. Mrs. Mann gave him 1,000 embraces and a great deal more, a piece of bread and butter, lest he should seem too hungry when he got to the workhouse with a slice of bread in his hand and the workhouse little brown cloth parish cap on his head. Oliver was then led Mr. Bumble from the national home where one kind word or look had never lighted the gloom of his infant years. And yet he burst into an agony of childish grief as the cottage gate closed after him. Wretched as were the little companions in misery he was leaving behind, they were the only friends he had ever known, and a sense of his loneliness in the great wide world sank into the child's heart for the first time. Mr. Bumble walked on with long strides. Little Oliver, firmly grasping his gold-laced cuff, trotted beside him, inquiring at the end of every quarter of a mile whether they were nearly there. To these interrogations, Mr. Bumble returned very brief and snappish replies for the temporary blandness which gin and water awakened in some bosoms had by this time evaporated, and he was once again a beadle. Oliver had not been within the walls of the workhouse a quarter of an hour, and had scarcely completed the demolition of a second slice of bread when Mr. Bumble, who had handed him over to the care of an old woman, returned and telling him it was a fortnight, informed him that the board had said he was to appear before it forthwith, not having a very clearly defined notion of what a live word was. Oliver was rather astounded by this intelligence and was not quite certain whether he ought to laugh or cry. He had no time to think about the matter. However, for Mr. Bumble gave him a tap on the head with his cane to wake him up and another on the back to make him lively. and bidding him follow, conducted him into a large whitewashed room where the 8 or 10 fat gentlemen were sitting round a table. At the top of the table, seated in an armchair rather higher than the rest, was a particularly fat gentleman with a very round red face. Bored to the board sat Bumble. Oliver brushed away 2 or 3 tears that were lingering in his eyes, and seeing no more but the table, fortunately bowed to that. "What's your name, boy?" said the gentleman in high chair. Oliver was frightened at the sight of so many gentlemen, which made him tremble, and the beadle gave him another tap behind, which made him cry. These two causes made him answer in a very low and hesitating voice, whereupon a gentleman in a white waistcoat said he was a fool, which was a capital way of raising his spirits and putting him quite at his ease. "Boy," said the gentleman in the high chair, "listen to me. You know you are an orphan, I suppose." "What's that, sir?" inquired poor Oliver. "The boy is a fool." "I thought he was," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "Hush," said the gentleman who had spoken first. "You know father or mother, and that you were brought up by the parish, don't you?" "Yes, sir," replies Oliver, weeping bitterly. "What are you crying for?" inquired the gentleman in the white waistcoat. And to be sure, it was very extraordinary. What would the boy be caring for? "I hope you say your prayers every night," said another gentleman in a gruff voice, "and pray for the people who feed you and take care of you like a Christian." "Yes, sir," stammered the boy. The gentleman who spoke last was unconsciously right. It would have been very like a Christian, and a marvelously good Christian too, if Oliver had prayed for the people who fed and took care of him. But he hadn't, because nobody had taught him. "Well, you have come here to be a usual trade," said the red-faced gentleman in the high chair. "So you will begin to pick oakum tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock," added the surely one in the white waistcoat. For the combination of both these blessings in the one simple process of picking oakum, Oliver bowed in the direction of the beadle, and was then hurried away to a large ward where, on a rough hard bed, he sobbed himself to sleep. What a noble illustration of the tender laws of England! They let the paupers go to sleep. Poor Oliver, he little thought as he lay sleeping in happy unconsciousness of all around him, that the board had his. The members of this board were very sane, deep, philosophical men, and when they came to turn their attention to the workhouse, they found out at once what ordinary folks would never have discovered. It was a regular place of public entertainment for the poorer classes, a tavern where there was nothing to pay, a public breakfast, dinner, tea, and supper all the year round, a brick and mortar Elysium, where it was all play and no work. "Oh, ho," said the board, looking very knowing, "we are the fellows to set this to rights. We will stop it all in no time." So they established the rule that all poor people should have the alternative of being starved by a graduate process in the house, or by a quick one out of it. With this view, they contracted with the waterworks to lay on an unlimited supply of water and with a corn factor to supply periodically small quantities of oatmeal and issued 3 meals of thin gruel with an onion twice a week and a half roll on Sundays. They made a great many otherwise and human regulations, having reference to the ladies, which it is not necessary to repeat, kindly undertook to divorce poor married people in consequence of the great expense of a suit in doctor's commons, and instead of compelling a man to support his family as they had therefore done, took his family away from him and made him a bachelor. There is no saying how many applicants for relief under these last two heads might have started up in all classes of society if it had not been coupled with the workhouse, but the board was a long-headed man and had provided for this difficulty. The relief was inseparable from the workhouse and the gruel and that frightened people. For the first 6 months after Oliver Twist was removed, the system was in full operation. It was rather expensive at first, in consequence of increase in the undertaker's bill and the necessity of taking in the clothes of all the paupers, which fluttered loosely on their wasted, shrunken forms after a week or two's gruel, but the number of workhouse inmates got thin as well as the paupers, and the board were in ecstasies. The room in which the boys were fed was a large stone hall with a copper at one end, out of which the master dressed in an apron for the purpose, and assisted by one or two women, ladled the gruel at meal times. Of this festive composition, each boy had one porringer and no more except on occasions of great public rejoicing, when he had 2 ounces and a quarter of bread besides. The bowels never wanted worship on again, and when they had performed this operation, they would sit staring at the copper with such eager eyes as if they would have devoured the very bricks of which it was composed, employing themselves meanwhile in such most assiduously with the view of catching up any stray splashes of gruel that might have been cast thereon. Boys have generally excellent appetites. Oliver Twist and his companion suffered the tortures of slow starvation for 3 months. At last they got to voracious and boiled with him hunger that one day he was starved for his age and hadn't been used to that sort of thing, hinted darkly to his companions that unless he had another basin of gruel per diem, he was afraid he might some night happen to eat the boy who slept next to him, who happened to be a weakly youth of tender age. He had a wild hunger. Implicitly believed him. A council was held, lots were cast. Who should walk up to the master after supper that evening and ask for more, and it fell to Oliver Twist. The evening the boys took their places. The master, in his cook's uniform, stationed himself at the copper. His pauper assistants ranged themselves behind him. The gruel was served out, and a long grace was said over the short commons. The gruel disappeared. The boys whispered each other and winked at Oliver, while his next neighbors nudged him. Child as he was desperate with hunger and reckless with misery, he rose from the table and advancing to the master, basin and spoon in hand, said, somewhat alarmed at his own temerity. Please, sir, I want some more. The master was a fat, healthy man, but he turned very pale. He gazed in stupefied astonishment on the small rebel for some seconds and then clung for support to the copper. As his hands were paralyzed with wonder, the voice with fear, what said the master at length? In a faint voice, please, sir, replied Oliver, I want some more. The master aimed a blow at Oliver's head with the ladle, pinioned him in his arms, and shrieked aloud for the beadle. The board was sitting in solemn conclave when Mr. Bumble rushed into the room in a great excitement and addressing the gentleman in the high chair said, Mr. Limpkins, I beg your pardon, sir. Oliver Twist had asked for more. There was a general stir. Horror was depicted on every countenance. For more, said Mr. Limpkins. Compose yourself, Bumble, and answer me distinctly. Do I understand that he asked for more after he had eaten the supper allotted by the dietary? He did, sir, replied Bumble. That boy will be hung, said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. I know that boy will be hung. Nobody Nobody controverted the prophetic gentleman's opinion. An animated discussion took place. Oliver was ordered into instant confinement, and a bill was next morning pasted on the outside of the gate, offering a reward of £5 to anybody who would take Oliver Twist off the hands of the parish. In other words, £5 and Oliver Twist were offered to any man or woman who wanted an apprentice to any trade, business, or calling. I never was more convinced of anything in my life, said the gentleman in the white waistcoat as he knocked at the gate and read the bill next morning. I never was more convinced of anything in my life than I am that boy will come to be hung. As I purpose to show in the sequel whether the white waistcoated gentleman was right or not. I should perhaps mark the interest of this narrative if I ventured to him just yet whether the life of Oliver Twist had this violent termination or no. Next chapter number 3 relates how Oliver Twist was very near getting a place which would not have been a sinecure. For a week after the commission of the impious and profane offense of asking for more, Oliver remained a close prisoner in the dark and solitary room to which he had been the wisdom and mercy of the world. It appears at first sight not unreasonable to suppose that if he had entertained a becoming feeling of respect for the prediction of the gentleman in the